Welcome to the Gilman Woolsey podcast. This is episode number 12. We hope you enjoy the show. Today, I am actually going to be talking by myself. Jackie had to work, and so she didn't have time to prepare adequately, so it's just me. So let's talk about ventilators. We're hearing all over the news, ventilators, 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 ventilators. So what exactly is a ventilator? We see them all the time on TV, and these are the devices where there is a breathing tube in someone's throat and the machine itself is taking over for the person. A lot of times in the hospital, we actually paralyze people with various drugs, and the machine is actually keeping that person alive. It's pushing the breath in, it's then pulling the breath out. These are obviously pretty complex machines. There's electronics in them, there's mechanical parts in them, there's filters that purify the air coming in and going out. And so these aren't things that we can just come up with quickly. This is why there's so much focus right now on ventilators, because the ventilators that we have for right now are really all we're going to be able to come up with. It's not something that we can just ramp up production tomorrow and create 1,000 new ventilators a day. That's just not going to happen. It takes time for all of these factories to actually change their manufacturing processes and to start rolling out additional ventilators that they can then distribute throughout the United States. The big issue with ventilators is going to occur first in New York City. This is becoming increasingly obvious every single day. If you watch the numbers of people infected in New York, it's rising at a rate much faster than anywhere else in the United States. Just this morning, I was watching on the news Governor Coumo from New York, and he was talking about the ventilator situation that they have there right now. He was saying that there's approximately 3,000 to 4,000 ventilators currently in New York. It wasn't clear to me if that was New York City or the entire state of New York from his remarks. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to find that specifically online. But he said that they are expecting that they are going to need 30,000 ventilators more to be able to handle this particular crisis. If we look at the federal government, we have something that's called the Strategic National Stockpile. This is equipment and supplies, including ventilators, that the federal government has on hand to handle any sort of disaster or emergency. I was looking online, and also this corresponds with what different government officials have said, but the number that is reported is that we have 12,700 ventilators total in the national stockpile. Just today, the federal government said that they were sending 4,000 of those ventilators to New York City alone. That represents almost 1/3 of the entire national strategic stockpile of ventilators going to one city in the United States. So I wanted to know how many people are in New York compared to the rest of the country. And the answer is about 5.7% of the total population of the United States is in New York. What this means is that we are dedicating literally about 1/3 of the entire national strategic stockpile to one city in the very beginning portion of this pandemic. If you think about this for a little bit, this raises a very problematic issue for everyone else in the country, because if all of these ventilators go to New York City, what's going to happen when this infection makes it to your city, to your town, to your state? New York City is saying that they'll use these ventilators, and after they're done using them, then they'll redistribute ventilators to other areas of the country. But I want to point out a few things why this is not likely to be useful to people in other places. First of all, this is actually a very, very long-lasting illness. Right now, coronavirus people that are put on a ventilator, it takes approximately 20 to 21 days before they can be removed from the ventilator itself. If we compare that to the flu, most people that are put on a ventilator for the flu have to be on a ventilator for about 5 days. So with coronavirus, you can expect that people that are put on a ventilator are going to have to be on the ventilator about 4 times longer than with the flu. Just looking at the population size of New York City, we can see how this is a problem, because it's not as if everyone that's going to get infected gets infected all at once. It happens over a long period of time. So as some people are getting better and are able to be pulled off the ventilators, there's going to be a backlog of people in New York that require ventilator therapy. And so those ventilators are then going to be repurposed internally to the people of New York City. I really don't know what the answer for this is, honestly, because obviously New York City has a big problem right at the moment, and no one wants to deny them supplies and devices that they need to keep their population alive. One of the other things that we really have to consider, in addition to ventilators, is there's a lot of other stuff that goes into the entire system besides the actual machine itself. So for each person that requires to have that mechanical ventilation, or to have the breathing tube put in, we have the actual tube itself, the breathing tube. We have various connectors. We have the long flexible tubing that connects between the ventilator and the device. And then usually, or oftentimes, we also have a humidifier, which takes and puts basically water into the air so it's not so dry for the person that's receiving it. All of these different components also have to be produced, and I have no idea what the levels of any of these are right now, but certainly it could be a problem if we run short on any of those. So I want to take and shift the discussion a little bit, because I've been getting a lot of questions from people about the symptoms of coronavirus. How do you know if you or a loved one may potentially have the coronavirus? Right now, it seems that the earliest and most reliable symptom of coronavirus is having a fever. You may ask, what do we define as a fever? So for younger people, a fever is anything over 100.4. With older people, sometimes we reduce it just a little bit, often to about 99.8. But in general, in my practice, I've always used 100.4. How many people are showing up with fever with coronavirus? The answer is about 9 out of 10. 9 out of 10 people will have fever when they go to their doctor if they are diagnosed with coronavirus. The second most common symptom that we're seeing is a dry cough. So about 7 out of 10 people, when they go to their doctor, are going to be complaining of dry cough. There's a whole bunch of other symptoms that people also complain about that are diagnosed with the coronavirus, but there's no single symptom that shows up in more than half of the people when they are showing up to their doctor or to the ER. So let's move on and talk a little bit about some statistics that are now showing up. We obviously have quite a bit of experience at this point in time with coronavirus, because it started in China, and then we have significant amounts of infection over in Asia that we've been watching. And now, obviously, Italy has had a big problem, and so we have significant experience and numbers coming out of these countries. But here in the United States, we have a little better access to the information, and it feels, I guess, closer to home. And so I wanted to tell you what the numbers are coming out of New York right now. So New York is saying that about 70% of people admitted to the hospital are over 70 years old. They're also saying in New York City that for people that are less than 70 years old, 80% of people in that group that are admitted have pre-existing conditions. So basically, if you're less than 70 years old and have no pre-existing conditions, you're only making up 20% of the people that are admitted to the hospital. That's not a huge percentage, but obviously it's still a risk and something that people need to take seriously. The other thing is that with all of the older people going into the hospital, when younger people do go into the hospital, it means less availability, longer wait times. And so as a total population, that's why it's so important for us to try to tamp down and control the infection, is simply to allow our healthcare system time to breathe and to cope with the massive number of people that are surging right now into the emergency rooms. Something interesting that I saw today, well, interesting probably isn't the right word. I would say more concerning and pretty sad, is over in Italy, there's actually some hospitals now that are not able to treat anyone over the age of 60. In other words, they're screening people based on age because they don't have the resources to handle the amount of people that are coming in. And so they've set a cutoff and they've said anyone over the age of 60, we're sorry, we just don't have the capacity to take care of you. You know, you need to go home and, you know, we wish you the best. Obviously, that's a very terrible situation going on over there. We really do, you know, wish them the best, and we hope that things improve, hopefully very soon for them. One other thing that I wanted to touch on that I find very disturbing here at home, however, is the situation with flights coming from these infected hot zones. We've actually known for quite a while that infection was building in certain areas, Seattle, New York City, some parts of California. It really makes you question why. Why have we not cut off travel from these areas into the center parts of the United States? When the infection was blooming over in China, we had no problem whatsoever cutting off travel and saying people from this area can't come to the United States. When it became really apparent that Europe was having a problem, specifically Italy, we started cutting off travel from these hot zone countries, and eventually we actually expanded that to all of Europe. But here in the United States, even though we knew there were some problematic areas, we've continued to this very day to allow travel to go on between, say, New York and Phoenix, or New York and Oklahoma, or New York and Salt Lake City. We have zero control right now over travel from these highly infected areas. We have seen a response from the government just yesterday in that they're saying that people that are coming from New York City to other areas of the country should self-quarantine for 14 days when they arrive there. But right now, if we're really trying to slow the spread of disease, what we need to do is stop human movement. Stop people going from these hot zone areas like New York City and going to areas where they have less of a problem. Because the sooner that this illness blooms in different areas, the sooner we're going to run into the limitations of our supply, such as ventilators. And the harder it is as a country for us to support the areas that are actually the hot zones. So I think that we really need to be thinking hard about how we're trying to limit the transmission of this and whether we're actually taking the right approach. We're seeing some, I guess, talk or indications coming out of the White House that they really want to try to wrap this thing up by April. So I'm not really sure what the endpoint game plan of all of this is. And I guess probably myself, as well as the rest of the country, it's kind of a little bit of a mixed message. It's important to distance ourselves and quarantine ourselves and limit travel and do all of these things. but we're looking in the relatively short term getting back to work. Looking at other countries, that time frame just doesn't seem realistic at all to me. And I really, really wish that the government would have a consistent standard and viewpoint how we're going to handle this. Either we're going to take this really, really serious and we're going to go on long-term quarantine lockdown as long as it takes, or we're going to implement some sort of strategy where we social distance and do other stuff and go about our business. I don't really understand this, slow down the virus campaign that we have right now, because what good does it do to slow it down for 2 or 3 weeks if we're just going to turn around and then get back to life that's somewhat like normal? The other thing is, has it even really been effective at all? If you look at the numbers of new infections, there's no obvious sign whatsoever that the things that we've done have slowed the virus down to a significant degree. Maybe time will tell, and that assessment on my part will be wrong, because this is a long illness. It does take a long time from the moment that someone's infected for them to show symptoms, and then it does take a significant amount of time before someone that shows symptoms gets into trouble and shows up in the hospital system. But I think that it's a little bit hard without seeing that curve flatten, without seeing the total numbers of people come down, to actually move forward and get back to work. We'll see. April 12th, a couple weeks away, and we'll see if they continue to hold that position, or if they reverse course kind of from where we are right now and start pushing people, to start resuming, normal life again. The last thing I wanted to discuss today was an interesting study that I had found, and this comes from the Center for Health Security. And this study was actually performed in 2018. Basically, what they were looking at is they were looking at the ventilator stockpiles for different countries around the world, as well as the ventilator capacity. Kind of surprisingly to me, the United States actually did pretty well compared to other countries, at least. So in the United States, we have about 20.5 ICU beds per 1,000 people in the population. If we compare that to, say, Canada, Canada has about 8.7 ICU beds with ventilators for every 100,000 people in their population. And Australia and New Zealand have about 5.4 ICU beds with ventilators per 100,000 people in their population. So that means we have about 4 times more ventilators than you're seeing in Australia and New Zealand. Clearly, in a bad pandemic situation, that's not going to be nearly enough for us. But, Canada and New Zealand, it really, sheds some light that they may have some significant problems if the infection takes, stronghold there. Obviously, both Australia and New Zealand and Canada tend to be more rural. They do have a few large cities, but there's a lot of people that are, naturally spread out just because of how the population there is distributed. But, it's something that we need to watch. And, I think we can learn a lot from this particular pandemic so that we can prepare better for the future. So I think I'll wrap up the show with that. Tomorrow we actually have someone who is a data scientist coming on, and we're going to be discussing different trends of the disease, looking at what's going on in Europe versus Asia, and how this thing may play out over time based on the different numbers that we're seeing. Thank you for listening to our show. We hope you have a good day and be safe. Thank you for listening to the Gilman Woolsey podcast. We hope you enjoyed our show. As always, if you have information that you would like to share with us, or if you would like to come on our show, please contact us at COVID, COVID, at gilmanwoolsey.com. We're always looking for new perspectives and to get an idea of what's going on out there. Thank you. Have a good night and be safe.